I am excited to introduce Mia Tarduno, a women's mentor, trauma-informed yoga instructor, birth doula, and founder of Move, Create, Radiate. Mia specializes in guiding women through transformative experiences that combine ancient wisdom with modern self-care. She curates classes, trainings, and retreats that include breathwork, somatic movement, menstrual cycle awareness, and deeply intentional ceremonies. By blending these tools, she helps women to create personalized rituals and rhythms to prepare for pregnancy and beyond. Today, Mia will share her insights on how these powerful practices can nurture your pregnancy journey. Please join me today in welcoming Mia. Hi, Mia, and welcome to the Healthy Pregnancy Revolution Summit. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. It's so great to be here.
I know it's so great to have you. You are all about celebrating ceremonies for all of the big events that occur in our lives as women. Why is ceremony important around the conception and motherhood journey?
So, ceremony really helps us transition from one state of being to another.
Hmm.
And for so many women, they feel that this is a really important change in their lives. When I talk to women, there's always something that happens when either they decide that they want to start that journey or they have started that journey, or even in the future. It seems like a very big event for many people, and it often goes unnoticed. And what ceremony does is really allows us time to pause and celebrate that transition, that we are actually transitioning into a different state. Our brains are rewiring and we're starting to think about the world in a different way. So it helps us take that time and also gives us a chance to celebrate that that's a really big milestone.
I love that. And I love the women who recognize it beforehand. I feel like I did not connect with that until I was like, something really big has happened here. Like I'm
Yes.
me, but I'm not me.
Yeah. And it happens at all different times during the journey, which is
Mhm.
why having ceremony is so important and can be so beneficial because you can do it anytime. And so for some people, they may decide to set up a ceremony for themselves the first day they start to think about maybe having a family someday. And for some people, it's 10 years after they've given birth. And then they
Mhm.
realize that it's then time for them to distinguish that something has changed.
Interesting. That's good to know as well. Because, see, I initially took it as it's part of the initiation part, which to me is first, like comes before, or comes like it's a forethought before something. Rather, like I was saying in my journey, I think it was like 6 months in or 3 months in, maybe, where you realize that. So you're saying at that point, you can have that ceremony and recognize that change.
Yeah, I mean, and you can really set up a ceremony for whatever you want, at least in the way that I teach it. I think the way I think about it is if you were to think of something in life that you have been celebrated for first,
Mhm.
and maybe wasn't that important to you. Like we have these birthdays or weddings or graduations, and sometimes those are really big and they feel like a really big feat for people. And sometimes we're like, this is silly. Why is everyone here? Why are they celebrating? This isn't a big deal for me. I remember my first one was my high school graduation, and I had family fly in from all over the US and they were all there. And I was like, I just kept going to school. Like, it's so sweet that they were all there, but to me, like internally in my internal landscape in my system, I was like, this
Yeah.
doesn't have a big impact on my life. This doesn't really feel like a big thing for me.
Mm.
And then alternatively, thinking of a time where something big really happened and then we weren't celebrated. And so I think about when I published a book. And I was like, that was massive. And I wanted everyone to come together and realize what a huge dedication that was. And so
Mhm.
for some people, that might be any time on that motherhood journey and how weird that feels and what a gap that feels in our lives to not be celebrated
Mhm.
for what for some people can be a really massive thing to decide to do with a partner, or just is a really big stepping stone in their lives.
So, what does ceremony do for us? How does it fill that gap?
Ceremony helps make the mundane sacred.
Mm,
So it creates an imprint on our nervous system when we go through something really special that ignites all of our senses, which is something that ceremony does really well. The body remembers. So a lot of times we have these memories and impacts from things that we've gone through. And when we actually take that pause and that time to be really intentional with it, deep within ourselves, we can remember that. So you might forget a moment or might forget exactly what happened,
mhm,
but your senses of smell and taste and touch and what you create during that time will really remind you that you've actually made a transition into a new state and a new person.
mhm. Do you find a lot of women find that it's difficult to recognize something, to stop and pause and say, like for instance, with you writing a book, this is a big deal and I want to celebrate.
Oh, yeah. I mean, in our culture, it's so hard for women to celebrate themselves.
Yeah.
Which is why I create as many resources as I can to set up self ceremony
Yeah.
because it is really challenging. And I think as women, we're taught to not brag and we're
Yep.
taught to not be loud about these things. It's like, okay, yeah, you decided to be a mom. Great. Lots of people do that. And it's like it doesn't wrap up the enormous decision and what that feels like in someone's body. And that can be really demoralizing.
Wow,
And
that's so true.
yeah, I find it really radical actually to take time to say, no, I deserve to be celebrated for this. And this is a really big deal. And this matters to me. It's like a really big reclaiming.
Yeah. Yeah, even you saying the motherhood thing, that it may not seem like it's that big of a deal. It seems like it happens. You know, you our neighbors, our family, we all have kids, it's everywhere, but it's a miracle, A, and B, it's a life choice. Most of the time, if you're making the choice, sometimes it happens, but it's a
Yeah,
choice that like it completely transforms everything. There's like before baby for me and after baby, right?
absolutely.
So you mentioned it's something that you teach to do like a self ceremony. Is it always that way, or do we sometimes invite them in and have it as though it's a birthday party style where we're actually celebrating and we want everyone involved? Are there two different differentiations there?
Yeah, that's a great question. No, what I mean by self ceremony is your ability to set it up as yourself and claiming that as something personal. But the ceremony itself can have as many people as you want there. It's more so just a platform for like you get to fill in the gaps of what the ceremony is for
Mhm.
and what it means and what your before and what your after is. So that could be motherhood. It could be all of these little tiny steps that happen along that journey also.
Yeah.
So it could be a celebration that we've been trying for 6 months, and this is how we're feeling,
Mm,
and we want to be surrounded by people right now and want to talk about that experience.
yeah.
It could be, after a miscarriage. It could be we're deciding to try for our second baby. Like there's so many little steps that happen along these that often don't get celebrated. And absolutely, the ceremony could be completely solo in which you go out in nature and get to have a special time by yourself, or it could be one or two close friends, or it could be 200 people. And that's absolutely up to you and what kind of celebration you want that transition to look like.
So I feel like the biggest thing that would come up, and maybe this is me, but I think a lot of women would feel this, is like, how do we overcome? It's easy to make a birthday announcement. How do
Mm.
we how do we overcome like the fear of everyone's going to think this is so silly? I'm making an announcement for XYZ, whatever the thing you want to celebrate. How do you walk women through overcoming that? I'm sure that comes up, right?
Absolutely. And to me, it does take courage,
Yeah.
but I find almost unanimously when I've announced things for myself or for people that I've worked with, almost everyone is like, that's so cool. You can do that.
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean by like the reclaiming of it is how important that you're like, yeah, I
Yeah.
decided instead of spending a bunch of money on a birthday party this year that I want to spend a bunch of money to be surrounded by women who talk about conception. And people are like, oh, I want to do that. Like, that's almost what I hear all the time is it
Wow.
reawakens something in women to be like, wait. we can just be celebrated because we want to, or because transition means something to me. Like, how empowering. And if there are people in your life who are like, that's weird, I don't get it,
Yeah.
maybe they're not at that celebration, and that's okay.
So I feel like in my mind I picture this makes sense. One of the roots to this tree we're discussing here is you're talking about, it sounds like, a large group that you have of friends, of family. And oftentimes I can find women are very isolated actually at that stage in their life. What if we take a step back and say they don't feel like they have anyone to invite to something like that? How do you suggest do you work with women in that area of how to meet friends, how to get out, or do you suggest I don't know, tell me more.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a question of what would be most meaningful for that transition in their life. So it would be really hard if you want to be really supported and there aren't people there.
Yep.
A way to do that is to extend invitations to people who you're not sure if they'll say yes or not.
Mm,
But sometimes when women go through ceremony together, it also bands them together.
yeah.
I've seen this even in ceremonies like a blessing way for a pregnant woman. And it's like sometimes you bring together people who don't know each other,
Mhm.
but when they're all there for that one person and they're celebrating her, it's like all of a sudden, all of those participants are then connected.
Hmm.
And then they get to be at least acquaintances, if not
Yeah.
friends, to be like,
Yeah.
we are here for this purpose to
Yeah.
celebrate this woman, and how awesome that we all get to serve in that way.
I love that. So it may feel like you're sending out a hodgepodge of invitations to
Yeah.
people who don't know each other, but you're bringing them together and just have braveness and that courage and that, right?
Yeah. And, to those who understand the transition, it's really an honor.
Yeah.
And you can think of it that way is each invitation is really honorable to say, I want you here for this transition. And it doesn't matter if you know everybody else in the group, like you are integral in this transition in my life. So are these other people. And this is
Mm.
who I want to be my crew going forward.
And I feel like a part of that, it's a self-love thing. Like you're really taking the stance to say, I matter. I
Yeah,
matter.
absolutely.
I think that's a missing piece for a lot of women. You can
Yeah.
take up the space and you can interrupt the regularly scheduled programming.
And you can be celebrated.
Yeah.
I host women's circles, and sometimes the first thing we do is go around the circle and say something that we're proud of ourselves for. And then each person gets to say something to that woman. Like, great
Oh,
job. That's so amazing that you did that. And people will cry. Like, they're like, people don't celebrate me,
yeah.
especially for the little things of like, I'm so proud that I got in my steps this week and I walked around the block a few times. And we're not living in a time where people are like, that's amazing. That's so hard to do.
Yeah.
Um, but a lot of women get it. They're like, wow, you carved out that time. That's so difficult. And like
Yeah.
just to hear that validation for some women is, really soul filling.
Yeah, absolutely. What is the difference between ceremony and ritual?
Ooh, this is a really good question. Because I talk about ritual a lot in my work and I love sharing rituals.
Mhm.
So ceremony I see as the defining event that transitions us from one phase to another.
Okay.
And so, like we said, there's many ways that that could look. It could be you having a solo day or a solo few hours and really deciding to make that transition, or it could be a few days with many people. But
Mhm.
it's really this defining moment that marks your transition.
Mhm.
And then a ritual is a repeatable practice that can be used to remember or enhance that transition.
Mm.
So, as you're stepping into a new journey, let's say you're noticing that along that journey, you're needing something like slowing down is a big one that I talk to women about when they're transitioning towards motherhood. And so perhaps there were all of these things on their plate, and they're realizing when they're inviting in a family that they're going to need to slow down a bit. So
Mhm.
the ceremony might be around transitioning into motherhood and understanding who they want there and what they want their lives to look like. And then
Mhm.
a ritual might be a daily ritual of sitting down for tea
Mm.
or
Mhm.
having a Sunday ritual of looking at everything to do that week and crossing off some things, taking time to notice where do I have space for myself.
Yeah.
And so these rituals help to solidify the intention of the ceremony.
That's beautiful. I feel like it takes a little bit more thinking. I'm a party planner. I can plan a ceremony. But a ritual, I'm like, okay, yeah, you want to keep that going, but it's more challenging for me to think, what can I incorporate now into life that notates that this is different?
Yeah, it's really intentional. And, I also want to say that a ritual can be really simple. I've talked to people about a ritual is deciding to take a deep breath after a workday or as they're transitioning from
Yeah.
being out doing errands in their car to being at home because maybe part of their intention was about being really present at home in this new phase of their life.
Okay.
What could be something that simple. So
Okay.
it's really about taking like, who am I in this next stage of life? What does she do? What is a practice that I would love to have to celebrate her? And then allowing that to be a piece of your day. And it doesn't need to be huge or something really massively different, but just
Mhm.
something to remember that ceremony each day to say, that's right. I said I would take a breath before I walk in the door and be really present when I'm home now.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. So it's kind of like the trigger is the handle, and you're like, okay, if my hand touches this, I'm gonna count to five and breathe, right? Is with that.
Totally. That's a
Oh,
beautiful ritual.
I get that. And then obviously we hear the common ones around like brushing your teeth is an easy something we do every single day, and to create implementing something new into that, I don't know where it obviously fits for different what they're focused on and wrapping it around that ceremony aspect, but oh,
Right,
cool.
absolutely. For some people, it could be adding in a prayer or a mantra or wearing something. I like doing that after I lead ceremonies or have ceremonies for myself, is I'll
Oh,
have a
I like
piece of jewelry or I did a ceremony where we all wore ribbons at the end of the ceremony for a few weeks after. So something visual can sometimes help people too.
and it ties everyone together who was a part of the ceremony.
Hmm.
And that continues that bond, like you mentioned. I love that. I was thinking more individual, but you could do something that's tying everyone together.
And then you can kind of feel those connections going forward and know that all of those people are out there wearing a ribbon for you. So,
I love that. I absolutely love that. Oh my gosh, that feels I'm bringing all this up, and I feel like I'm definitely in that place in my life where I've been isolated at home with a
mm,
baby for years, and I know there's mommy groups and all that, but then especially with COVID, when that hits at the same time as someone has a baby, it's just very isolating. That feels really good to me to even think like, what a cool way to meet new people, and
mm,
that's the thing. That's what you're missing. You can meet people, right? Of course. It's like you miss that depth in a party. I don't know if anyone else can relate to me. I just feel like can you ever get that deep as you could with your best friend from high school or middle school? And that feels really good. That feels like the first thing I've ever thought of that really could connect you and build those roots with someone, at any stage of life.
yeah. And they can be really simple. And I encourage people. I mean, there's so much on the internet these days too, and there's
Sure.
some beautiful ritual books and, scroll through things and see what fits you and your group because for some people, I understand not wanting to go way out of the box and something that makes them uncomfortable. And that to me is really the understanding of ceremony that's integral to you is when you hear that thing that's like, that's what I need. That's what connects me. That's what feels good. It's not too out of the realm for what my friends would be willing to do. And it feels fun and comfortable and exciting for me.
Great suggestion. Yeah. What holds people back the most, do you feel like, from setting up ceremonies for themselves?
Yeah. I feel like there's a couple of things, and I'm really glad we're talking about this because ceremony means different things to different people.
Mhm.
And I find that they either have a preconceived notion of something that they didn't really resonate with as a kid. Like we talked about a birthday party. And for
Yep.
some people, that was fun as a kid. And some kids may have been really sensitive or introverts, and they remember like wearing a hat they didn't like or eating a cake. Um, And so they tend towards not wanting to be celebrated in that way.
Mhm.
Or on the other hand, some people can think of ceremony like the naked women dancing in the woods around a fire, which to some can be exciting and to some can they can feel really disconnected to.
Yeah.
Or there's a really important conversation about cultural appropriation, where some people might be hesitant to take a practice if and make it their own if they don't fully understand it.
Hmm.
So that's why I like teaching ceremony from an internal space and why I ask more questions than I do give suggestions.
Okay.
Because when it's coming from your heart and your own experiences, it won't be appropriated. It won't be the birthday party that you won't like. It won't be something crazy out of your realm of discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
It will be yours. And because it's this really empowering act, it's not about following any scripts or rules, but about using your inner guidance to set that up. So I think those are some of the pieces of resistance and how I suggest really making it your own.
That feels like you just broke all the rules. You just like busted out all of the lines I thought we had to draw in. Because I guess I relate to those birthday parties and
Right.
parties in general that we think we know how they're supposed to go. And yeah, it just gives us a free blank page.
Yeah. And like I was saying, I feel like each time that people, and especially women, because I do feel like we're the leaders of culture right now, is how I think of us. And I really feel like when women break the rules, it breaks the rules for society in a really beautiful way. Like
Oh my
each
gosh,
time.
Mia, tell me more about that. I love that. I say that again, women are the leaders
Yeah.
of society.
Yeah, I think we're the leaders of culture right now.
Culture. Yeah. Okay.
So, and we're continually making culture with each time we make a decision to have a celebration in a different way and say, I want my birthday party to look differently. I want my kid's birthday party to look differently because we're seeing each other in a different light. So instead of noticing everyone gets the same thing for their fifth birthday party,
Yeah.
like to know a child in a deeply, in a really deep way and to know like my child wouldn't want to be celebrated in this way.
Mhm.
And that starts with ourselves for our children to see that I want to be celebrated in this way for this transition in my life.
You just took that really deep. Like, okay, so I know we're going off on a different direction here, but I'm just curious. Is it like, I know I've heard of, not bringing gifts instead, and you're bringing the
Mhm.
$5 thing, that's a big thing. Or, of course, the food. A lot of crunchy groups, want to get away from the traditional birthday cake. Is it
Yeah.
deeper than that? Is it something else, or am I kind of on track there, what you're intending to mean?
I think that's perfect because those can go as deep as you want them to. I
Yeah.
mean, food connects us to land and connects us to culture. So I think there's actually a lot of decisions that we're making in there that's beyond the like, I don't want a sugary birthday cake,
Hmm.
but to say I'm actually intentionally deciding what food to bring in here.
Hmm.
I mean, that's a really deeply cultural step. If you
Yeah.
look at ceremonies from cultures all over the world, food is such a huge part of it.
Hmm.
Like people will plant things in the ground for years before having a ceremony. And so
Yeah.
we might think it's as simple as going to the grocery store, and it might feel like that to us on the surface level. That's like, I want us to have some healthy options at this party.
Hmm.
But really, that can go as deep as we want it to say, we're changing a season right now. And I want this to be seasonal local food and support our economy and support our community around us and local farmers. And all of a sudden, how much that opens up to say, all of those people might not be at our party, but we're celebrating them by being here. So I
Hmm.
think, like that, each of those levels can get as deep as you want them to. And what's really beautiful about people who are starting to make this transition is they can describe as much or as little of that as they want to their guests, which I like giving people the permission to because a woman might make that intentionality and the people who she's inviting might not be ready to go there, but
Hmm.
she can know. And they'll feel that on a deeper
Yeah.
level.
Yeah.
They'll get that and she'll get the feedback of like, that party felt really different. That felt really special. And they
Hmm.
might not know why yet, But depending on the kind of people who are there, you might be able to describe little bits of that or all of the depth of it if you want to.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. And then the gift giving thing, I think, is in a big transition. We
Yeah.
all, every single one of us realize, the gifts are just out of control. And if we could introduce the concept that I think children are a lot smarter than we're giving them credit for and a lot more compassionate and loving. They probably even more so than us a lot of times. And I think if we, would suggest other things, such as everyone donates to such and such cause and like get your child on board with it for some reason or in some exciting way and
Yeah.
purpose that means a lot to them. It's just, I see what you're saying. Like we really are going that way. I think women are leading that. And I love seeing that happen.
Yeah. And it brings back that individuality as well, which is so beautiful because,
Yeah.
we know about the five love languages now. And
Yeah.
so only one of those is gifts.
Yeah.
And so the rest of the four love languages, those people have been celebrated through gifts and they don't actually feel love through gifts. So
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah. Such a good point.
so
Yeah.
silly that we're trying to love them in this way that we think we're supposed to be loving them
Yeah.
when maybe they want a circle of people telling them why they're awesome. Like maybe
Oh,
that's
that gives me
more
chills.
meaning.
I would never think to do that for kids, right? But like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, that's
And we can do
amazing.
that for ourselves and we can do
Yeah.
that for our kids and our kids can see us do that at dinner parties. Like
Yeah.
really get to set that up for them too.
Look at me. I'm already catching myself. Like I'm more focused on my daughter. Like that's what we do, right? I'm like, I'm even
Uh-huh.
seeing I'm struggling with talking about doing this for me. I'm like, no, I'm definitely excited about my daughter, but you're right. Like this is a ceremony for us. Okay, back on track here.
That's the thing is, kids absorb. We know this.
Yeah.
Like we can set up things for them, but really they absorb.
Yeah.
So by proxy, even if they're in the room when you have a ceremony for yourself and
Mm.
you invite over friends and you say, I'm making a big transition in my life, and you give them the floor to tell you what's wonderful about you and the qualities that you want going forward,
Yeah.
like your daughter will see that. And then you
Oh,
don't have to teach her. She just sees how this happens and starts to think of that as normal. Like, oh, that gives me chills.
it does. And we're changing generations
Yeah.
just by changing our habits, just by something as
Mhm.
simple as that. Oh, I love that. Oh, it's amazing, Mia. What are the 5 stages of ceremony?
Yeah. So I created these five stages, and this is what has worked for me, just creating and being a facilitator
Mhm.
for ceremony. I do want to take a moment to say that there are some ceremonies with deep roots in cultures that have specific pieces to them. And I honor those, and some of them I've studied. So if you're looking to do like a very specific type of ceremony, I do encourage you to research that. And especially if you have um, like lineage roots in there, it can be really beautiful to go and see like what the specific stages of that ceremony are. But
Mhm.
what I'll talk about are kind of the five stages of something that you can set up for yourself. And so these are more like guidelines. And when people set them up, it's kind of just little like fill in the blanks. And then you can see if you really want these pieces to them and if you want them to be a really big piece or a small piece of what you want to set up for yourself.
Mhm.
So the first is a reflection. And so this is like, where are you coming from? And so
Mhm.
we were talking about that pause, like a moment before we say, okay, now I'm going to do the next thing, because that's us in our culture is like, I'm building this next thing or I'm doing this next thing in my life. And instead to say, wow, I've spent this many decades of my life doing this and dedicated to this and impacting this. So having a reflection is really important. You can do that by yourself, or when other people are there, it can be really beautiful because they'll chime in and say, like, remember when you did this? Remember that time?
Mhm.
The second is honoring. And so that's where you are now, just as you are. And this one can be really hard for us to say, like, where am I now? Because sometimes that might be in the middle.
Mhm.
Like I'm not there anymore and I'm not yet in my next stage.
Mhm.
So what does that feel like? and honoring that you're in a time of transition.
Hmm.
The third is a transformation, and that's a dedication to a new way of being. And so that's where starting a type of ritual or kind of having a bigger event that really makes you feel like you're transitioning. Sometimes people will change clothes, or sometimes they'll do some sort of bath, or it could be some sort of movement in their body. That's kind of like the big shift for them. And then there's an emerging, and that's really celebrating and adorning your new self. That might be the time for gifts or words of encouragement. And then the last is an integration. And that's what brings you back into the real world, into
Hmm.
how you want to be in your world now. So that's where you can start to integrate those kind of daily rituals
Hmm.
and also decide how that emergence looks. If it's like popping back into your day or if it's really slowly. And maybe there's a couple days where you're really quiet and you go offline and have some time to start to integrate that.
Hmm. Yeah, we really underestimate just sitting in peace and allowing what needs to come through to come through.
Yeah.
I want to get into the nitty gritty of all of these. I know you share so much more with the women you work with and guiding them through that. That sounds amazing, and I cannot wait to try those. What?
Yeah, and I encourage people to just play around with them. Like when you hear honoring, what does that mean to you? And, I have some suggestions, but also I encourage women in this radical nature of setting up ceremony for themselves to try it and say, what makes me feel honored? Because a lot of us don't actually know. And
No.
so then we can, yeah, ask our friends or try things and let it be awkward for a little bit and see when it really hits and when you're like, oh, okay, that had an impact.
Yeah, I had someone. Yeah. Well, I started it. I guess I'll say I'm very much, I can relate so much to that. I do not recognize little wins at all. And I recently had someone point some things out that I'm like, really? I should be excited about that? Like that's just on to the
Mhm.
next thing, just on to the next thing. That's what we do. Just this feels so good to consider the slow down and to appreciate and recognize because life's flying by and we're just gonna miss it.
Yeah, and like we said, it can be something really simple. One that I love to do, I love drinking chai.
Mhm.
And when I do something big, that's like my win. Especially
Mm.
if I'm on a busy day or something where I'm like, I want to take a moment, I want to
Yeah.
celebrate myself. But that's one that I found for me that if I go to my favorite coffee shop and I get a cup of chai and I sit and I drink it, or even if I have to bring it with me, but it's like my little token that
Yeah.
I'm like, yes, I did do something hard.
Yeah.
So it can be as simple as that. And once you find your things, um, it can be really meaningful to you. And it's almost like this secret that you get to hold that you're like, that has a really big impact to me, where somebody else could pick up a chai in the morning and it might not mean anything to them. But to me, it's like, ooh, this is my little reminder that like I did something big and I deserve something special for it.
I love that you shared that because that's not the direction I was thinking. And it can be as little as that or as big as a weekend, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Yeah. I see, that feels even more manageable. And
Right. They're doable. It can be like put a shell in your pocket and hold it throughout the
yeah,
day and remember.
yeah, anyone can implement that now, right? What impact have you seen ceremony has had on the lives those that you've helped?
Yeah. So ceremony really helps people integrate and transition. So I'll give an example. A ceremony that I run. So I'm a birth doula, and a ceremony I run for all of my clients while they're pregnant is a fear release ceremony.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because I meet with them for a lot of prenatal appointments, and you would think that fears would come up naturally. And they do sometimes. And we'll talk through things, and it feels like we're more on a logistics level when we're just having a conversation about, like, oh, this is something you're concerned about. Here's what we can do.
Yeah.
But every single time we run that ceremony, there is so much more that comes out, and it surprises them. also, that they're like, I
Mm,
didn't even know I was scared about this thing. I
mm,
didn't even know that I was holding on to this fear from my mother, aunt, grandmother, whoever that was. I have both parents do it if there's two parents in the picture,
mm,
and they're both surprised at each other's
mm,
and what that brings up. And usually there's a really big relief after. It really helps people get out of their minds when they're in a state of ceremony because it is this like special bubble that they're in. It's
mm,
not just a conversation. It's like really feel into your body what's there.
mm,
And so it's not just logical. And I think that that's the really big impact is it starts to work on our subconscious level a little bit more. It
mm,
gets more kind of in towards like the meditative state of our minds and helps to pull out those things so that afterwards people can feel a lot more clear. And they're
mm,
like, I don't even know what happened. But it's these things that we kind of just like shove to the corners of our mind. And once we give them space and voice, they can move.
wow. Things we may not even realize are there.
Right, absolutely. Until we're just given even just a little bit of space. It's beautiful. That ceremony usually takes about an hour. It's simple. And just having that space, they like come up with so much more than they had previously talked to their midwives or doctors about and didn't even know was present for them.
Hmm. You mentioned you bring the partners in.
Mhm.
Do men generally accept this well? You know, if a woman's saying she is interested in doing this and she's pregnant, or when she gets pregnant, she wants to do this, how does she approach her spouse with that? You feel like men generally do accept this well and fall into it, or what's your experience there?
I think it depends on the person.
Yeah.
I think clients that I attract, I'm pretty open when I meet with them the first time, that I'm like, these are things that I do. And I've just been actually really impressed by people who maybe might not be on like a spiritual journey per se or have done ceremony before.
Mm,
But once they're given that structure, I mean, the fear release that I do is really simple. We write things on pieces of paper and burn them, and then they write a new version on a little card for themselves. And I think the way that it's presented also helps. Like we talked about, kind of doing something that's really meaningful to them without it needing to be big or elaborate or scary. We can start to make it feel a bit more normal. So I
mm,
think in the way that that's presented, it's like, I mean, of course they have a choice. They don't have to participate, but it's also like, hey, this is just what we're doing for our prenatal session today, and we'd love to have you be a part of it. And mostly I've seen them be like, okay, great, this is what we're doing.
yeah.
If this helps their partner and this is what they're doing, it's actually been like a really beautiful bonding experience. So that's what I would say to people too who are nervous about bringing other people in is if it's important to you, like the people who love you in your life will be on board. And it's okay if at first they're like a little, I don't know how this goes, but if you know how to lead it or you have a friend who's leading something, it can be really simple for them.
Mm. Well, that's encouraging.
Yeah.
What's your favorite ceremony to facilitate right now?
Ooh, the ceremony I'm loving right now is called Closing of the Bones. And that
Mm.
one is a little more traditional Mexican ceremony, done. I do it postpartum, but it's actually a ceremony that can be done during any transition in life.
Okay.
That could be marriage or divorce or empty nesting, um, moving out of a house, starting a business, any of those.
Oh.
But I do it as a postpartum ceremony as a separation of the mother baby. And so it's done at least 40 days postpartum. And
Hmm.
that one has quite a few pieces to it, but a lot about cleansing and honoring the mother,
Hmm.
and then getting to wrap her in traditional Mexican scarves and taking a moment to separate her nervous system really from her babies and start to understand that they are now in a period of time of separating. And it can be really healing for them and many generations back. And it's usually really impactful. I do it as kind of the end of my time working with a pregnant woman.
Hmm.
And Yeah, it's been a really beautiful ceremony.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds amazing.
Yeah,
Well, thank you for sharing all this with us, sharing all of this today.
absolutely.
You are also sharing a free gift with the ladies. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Yes. So we've talked about setting up self ceremony. And so I have a step-by-step guide that leads you through how to set up a ceremony for yourself. And
Ooh.
in that, you can invite as many people as you want to. And there's journaling prompts. So it's really like a workbook. And you can start to work through that and see really what you're transitioning to and from, and what kind of elements you want to be there. And it brings you through the entire thing of the steps of the ceremony, what to include, and some examples, and also kind of some background of what ceremony means so that you can describe that to the people in your life. So
Mm.
I highly encourage people to download that and start to set up something and see how that feels and try it many times and see what feels really true to them.
That sounds amazing. Thank you for enlightening all of us today.
Yeah.
I have links to that gift as well as your website and social media where everyone can find more about ceremony and Mia and this page where you're listening today. Thank you, Mia.
Yes. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.